This is the assembly portion of the air engine. After you have finalized all of your parts, you'll see a drawing here that illustrates all of the parts, how they go together, a description and list there. And what I have done is I have taken all of the parts and laid them out in the same order as they go down this list right here. So we have the finalized body, the cylinder, the spring cup, the nut, and this is something that you'll be given. We've got the stud there that's got the threads on it, our piston, our assembled crankshaft, the base, the flywheel, and some hardware such as a spring, the 1032 flathead screw, and then our little set screw right there. Before you try to assemble this engine, what you need to do is you need to go through every single part and deburr all of the surfaces that have been machined, every single surface. Some key places to point out: these small holes, they're a little difficult. You can see one of us, we have a very small countersink that will help you deburr those holes, and you can use your regular countersink to deburr the other holes that you have on here. Take a file and carefully break these edges, deburr those. I actually get down in here and deburr all of these interior angles here, all of the edges, and make sure that you don't have any burrs anywhere on any of these parts. And it takes some time. You know, catch this edge right here, there again, that small hole. Make sure you deburr this hole front and back, the hole where your piston goes in. This guy, make sure that it's nice and flat on the back side. It's been properly deburred. This threaded piece, this is one that you will probably have to pay some attention to and spend some time on. One of the key areas where burrs like to hide are up here at the edge of this thread, where the threading stopped, where you were running the die on and you stop. There's usually a burr that develops on that edge. One of the ways that you can attack that is you can put this in the lathe and clamp it gently and use some fine grit sandpaper while the lathe is running over the threads and focus on this edge right here, and then you can turn it around and you can do the same thing there. And by sanding with the lathe on the threads as well will help to clean up those threads too. Your piston, it's a little bit of work. You've got to take care of all of these edges, and this edge right up in here and this interface at that corner is a little tricky, but you have to get all of those burrs out all the way around, and then also taking care to deburr that hole on the front and the back side. Your crank, making sure that you don't have any burrs on this cutout right here, and making sure that it's smooth all the way down, making sure that you don't have any burrs on any of these edges, and this edge where you put that counter bore right there as well. The base, make sure that you've deburred all the edges around and the top and bottom hole. Your flywheel, the interior here, that hole, this outside edge, check these, that right there. Now, one area that you may have missed is down inside. I don't know a good way to show you, it's difficult to see even in person. Inside this hole here, where the tapped hole comes through, there will usually be a small burr right in there on that edge, and what you need to do is actually take the reamer that you used and go back through that hole, and that will clean that burr out. after you've tapped that hole. So once you've assembled, or once you've deburred everything, then you can start assembling. And what I would suggest is that you test fit every single part individually prior to assembling any group of parts. So check every single surface that touches every other surface. And what I mean by that is, for instance, we've got the cylinder and we've got this piece here. We need to check that it goes on there and it sits there and is free to move. You know, we've got, it's pretty good right there. Also, we've got our piston that goes in and out. You've got your crank that goes on here. We want to make sure that all of those pieces fit individually before we start assembling anything. So once you've done all of those test fits, then we can start assembling. And the first thing that I tell people to put together is this threaded pin into the body. We're going to put that in, and you'll need to tighten this really good. One of the ways that you can do that is you can actually clamp the threaded part in one of the soft jaws in one of the vices that we have in the shop that have the aluminum jaws in it. You can clamp that in there and use the body to actually tighten it down. The next thing I would put on is the base, and this is just going to help you handle this assembly. So I will hold the body in one hand like this, and I will put this screw through there and start the thread. And I like to get everything lined up, and then I can use a screwdriver, a Phillips head screwdriver, to tighten that up right there. So now I've got what's starting to look like a, you know, getting to be what we're going to end up with. The next thing you're going to need to do is you're going to need to put your crank in. We're going to put our crank in right there. And after you put the crank in, I like to put one finger there to keep it from falling out. And we're going to need to put our flywheel on. But prior to putting our flywheel on, we need to get the set screw started in here. And this guy is really tiny. And one of the best ways that I've found to do that is to take your Allen wrench and load the set screw onto the Allen wrench, and then use the Allen wrench to put that set screw in there. And I'm not driving it in more than just enough to hold it into the hole. And we're going to align that flat right there with the set screw, and I'm going to lightly tighten it up just like that. And I'm going to make sure that there is a tiny gap right there. I don't know if you guys can see that, but I want a little bit of float in there so that it doesn't bind up. I'm going to tighten that up just a tiny bit. There we go. We got just a little bit of float, and if I spin it, everything spins around good. So I'm going to set that down for a second. I'm going to go to the cylinder and the piston, and I'm going to put this flat up and this flat up, and I want them kind of aligned like that. And I'm going to hold that in my hand and then pick this up and start to put this together. And this is probably the trickiest part, because you have to align this pin, and this hole all together. And I'm trying to get it where you guys can see it, just like that. That takes a little bit of fiddling sometimes for it to all go together, but we can see if I hold it together, everything is moving around well. The next thing I need to do is drop my spring retainer onto that stud. I'm going to put my spring into the spring cup, and I'm going to put this nut on there. And do not tighten these nylon lock nuts down onto the threads. Just let it tighten down until it bottoms onto that, and just leave that there. And once you do that, you should have a functioning air engine. If you feel it bind up, don't force it. Don't try to force it past. If you feel it lock up, don't try to bind it together, force it past it and think that it'll just break loose and be fine. There's probably something not right, and we need to take a look at it. And that is a fully assembled air engine. Once you have assembled your motor, you can bring it to the test station, and we can add some oil in the points to where you've got sliding and rotating parts out of some of the lube oil that we have for the machines. And you can add a small amount over the hole, and we can rotate that in. You can move this back and forth and get some oil up and behind here, down in there, and in the crank area as well. Once you have some lubrication oil in your engine and you work it around a little bit and everything seems to be rotating and moving smoothly, we can load it into the test fixture here. This port right here on the side of the body needs to align with the hole that is right here on the test stand. The flywheel goes towards the back and this nut goes toward the front. I'm going to put it down, and there are two pins right here. They're a little tricky to see, but there are two pins that rest against the back of the body to help align that hole. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to push this in here over to the side and then back against that. I'm going to rotate this clamp and lock it closed. And this handle over here allows me to adjust the air pressure. And you see, if I increase my air pressure, the air pressure goes up on this bottom readout here. This is going to register our RPM. I can use my finger on the flywheel, and I can lift up on this side of the flywheel to start my engine. And I'm going to turn this engine up, the pressure up, until this reaches about 80 psi. What we'll do is we'll run this motor for a while to get it to break in a little bit, but after it's broken in for a while, what you'll see is that you'll get somewhere around 5,000 RPM at 80 psi. And on the low end, what we're going to need to see is that it runs below 5 psi. So We want to see above 5,000 at 80 and below 5 psi period. So there we go. And that's a fully tested engine.